When someone asks you to think of Ben 10, what is the first image that pops up in your head? In my case, the first thing that I always think of is always this one particular frame of Lodestar. First thing, every time. For the longest time, I didn't even know which episode this shot came from, but it was living rent-free in the back of my mind, and since it's now my job to overanalyze everything that I grew up with, lucky me, I thought it was high time I found the source of this frame. This led me to the episode, Simple. So, I stuck the episode on for old time's sake, and that's when I was reintroduced to my favorite episode in the entire Ben 10 franchise. Which is interesting, because a lot of people either hate this episode or just don't care about it either way. In this video, I'd like to shed some light on the significance that I think this episode holds, in the hopes of helping others to at least somewhat appreciate this episode even a little bit more. Without further ado, let's get right into it. It's hero time! Also subscribe or I'll say mean things about your toes on Instagram, don't test it! For those who need a quick recap on what this episode is even about, let me summarize it as quickly as possible for you. Ben gets a distress call from a little blue alien cretin called Probity who wants him to stop the war happening on her planet. Ben goes there and tries to convince two factions of alien racists to stop being racists. Then Ben commits property damage and the aliens stop being racist towards one another, but then they start being racist towards him. Purple gay! That is pretty much it. It's a very nice, simple, easy plotline to follow. Not too much meat, not too much fluff, just something pretty standard. Or at least, that's how most people see it. I think this episode has a little bit more hidden value when we look between the lines and take a proper look at the messages the episode is trying to convey. So, let's take the time with this video to discuss each of those deeper themes that hide just beneath the surface of this otherwise plain episode concept. Those themes being war, race, humanity, and politics, all very uplifting and lighthearted topics for sure. Let's start with the topic of war, since I think that's the one that the episode is most obviously discussing. Ben 10 has tackled the topic of war and the potential outbreak of war on numerous occasions, and yet those episodes all have a pretty distinct difference in tone when compared to this one, where those episodes make the prospect of war seem as bleak and horrible as it really is. This episode instead takes the angle of treating war as little more than a joke. From Ben spouting cheesy anti-war sentiments,
and I've come all this way to tell you that war just isn't cool.
So don't be a fool. Smoking isn't cool.
To the fact that the war is temporarily put on hold, only to resume because Ben offered the wrong hand to shake.
What just happened?
You ruined everything. You tried to shake with your right hand. We shake with the left. Everyone knows that.
This episode really feels as though it's undermining the true impact of war. And honestly, I quite like that angle in this instance. Because in this specific instance, it really works. These people are fighting because they can't remember what color a statue was. Their leaders are fully aware that the only reasons they even care about this conflict is because it distracts people from the fact that all of their problems really stem from the fact that their societies are corrupt and their leaders are complete idiots.
We need war, Ben 10. That's right. It gives people something to blame their problems on. If they can't afford houses or food or schools, it's the war's fault. If there were no war, they'd blame us for all that.
Which, honestly, is so scarily realistic and such an alarmingly well-aged notion that it's actually kind of impressive in its own right. This episode is fully aware of why wars begin and how those in power benefit from keeping conflict going. And it looks at those facts through a lens of absurdism. Real people in power benefit from using war as a distraction from the other problems in their societies, and so this episode focuses on a pair of leaders so corrupt and so reliant on this tactic of social deflection that they literally are breaking their peace treaties over something so small as the very handshake that was meant to seal the treaty in the first place. It's such a ridiculous and goofy idea that it comes across as a joke, which it is, but at the same time, is it really inaccurate? Is this really something that we aren't seeing in our own real world right now? Not only that, but Ben's form of intervention is just as crude as the methods used by the two leaders, because just like them, he uses force to get what he wants. Ben threatens violence and raises his fist to those who disagree with him, forcing them to comply with his demands and what he sees to be the right thing. You know what's ironic about that? That's exactly how people behave in wartime, believing their methods to be correct and thus resorting to violence in order to force that way of life upon others. And just like a real war, trying to use force to end conflict only ends with another faction being drawn into that very conflict. This episode treats its key conflict as an over-exaggerated joke, while at the same time being absolutely correct in how these conflicts begin and develop in the first place. And I think that's just really well done, in a way that's both hilarious and, honestly, pretty tragic. Now for the topic of race, and I mean, come on. They're literally different coloured people fighting over if a statue used to be one colour or another. There's some parallels. I find it interesting that both sides' factions wear identical clothes and have identical builds, as it lends to this idea that these people really are exactly the same in terms of both culture and species, with their only differences being the superficial ones, such as individual beliefs and skin colour. Once again, sort of sounds like something from the real world, huh? When the two leaders are forced to sit down and try to work out a new peace treaty, they immediately put their differences aside in order to try and work together to find a way out. It isn't even a case of them having to put aside their differences first, they just automatically switch to cooperating when Ben comes in and forces them to see eye to eye. This really adds to the idea that, at the end of the day, every reason these two claim they have for hating one another boils down to nothing more than just meaningless excuses for the fact that, simply put, they just like to fight. This is a good segue into our third and, in my opinion, most interesting theme of the episode, which is humanity. As Kevin so accurately says in this episode,
"War's like eating or sleeping, Gwen. It's part of human nature."
And although Ben replies with,
Yeah, human nature. But these aren't humans, so yeah.
we see that these aliens not only have very similar appearances to humans, but very similar behaviors as well. I enjoy how the faceless masses of soldiers are less human than when we actually get to see their faces. They somehow become more human to our minds once we can see their faces, even though we now can see that they are quite literally less human than we might have imagined. I find that so interesting, and I enjoy how the episode plays with that idea. Though this species looks human, they aren't, and so they do things differently. We want to say that they're being irrational, that they're fighting for no good reason, but that's putting our human ideals on something that looks like us, when in reality, these people are from an entirely different world with an entirely different culture. We want them to understand Ben's point of view because we are perceiving them as human, when that's an unfair expectation that we subconsciously believe due to the way they look. I enjoy how this episode takes our ability to empathize with humanoid creatures in order to make us see these aliens as idiotic or insane, when at the end of the day, we shouldn't be forcing them to meet our standards at all, because they aren't even from the same planet or society as us. Though it's irritating to see how these people fight over the smallest things, we only feel that way because we are projecting our human ways of thinking onto them, when that's an unfair expectation. But even despite all that I've just said, at the same time, despite the episode having this notion of unfair human association, these people are doing fundamentally human things. Conflict is integral to their societies and the structures of power, and the ways they go about things are similar to us as well. I like to perceive this as the episode saying that, although they aren't human, the undesirable traits that we can see in these aliens are even more human than their appearances. We are closer to these aliens in spirit than we are in appearance, and though we can watch the episode and feel like these people are being idiotic and crude, these are exactly the ways that we can act in the real world. And I think it's impressive that the episode can convey something like that. Stop and think when you rewatch this episode, because it paints a clearer picture of humanity than you'd think, even while going out of its way to say that it isn't doing that. And finally, the subject of politics, and honestly, everything I've already covered so far is pretty much the culmination of this final subject. The blues versus the reds, the division of society based on the color of one's skin, the ways conflict is used to distract from deeper societal issues, and how people will use force in order to supposedly bring about peace, and so on. This episode is, at its core, political, and despite airing about 16 years ago now, it's honestly got some of the most accurate critiques of our own current political climate. The fact that something from 16 years ago, something made for children no less, can so clearly point out the flaws in something that still exists 16 years onwards, is a testament to how well these writers understood the world around them. And I think it's pretty clear with this episode that they think the state of our world is simply ridiculous, and everything we fear and loathe about others is simply superficial because, at the end of the day, simply put, we are all just people.